Before I begin, I want to point out that there is something very off about my story. This took place around 12 years ago, and it's still one of the most creepiest and unexplainable experiences I've had. I'll try my best to explain my encounter in the best detail as possible. This happened when I was in my late 30s on a road trip with my mom and sister. We had all been driving cross-country somewhere in the southern U.S. Looking back, I can't remember what state it was, but if I had to guess, I'd say it was somewhere between Texas and Oklahoma. It was around 11 at night, and I remember we had found ourselves on an interstate that night in need of food and gas. Thankfully, my sister had pointed out that she had seen a sign that had a rest stop up ahead. It seemed to be the only gas station for several miles, so with no other choice, we had to stop there. We pull in, and right off the bat, we see a van full of teenagers and two men standing by a small gray car. We weren't sure as to what it was, but almost immediately, something about this place seemed very wrong. My sister and I had went inside the gas station to use the restroom, but the strange part was that there was no gas station attendant anywhere. On our way out, we had overheard the teenagers say that they had felt creeped out and that the gas pump wasn't even working. The teenagers leave in a hurry, but the two men by the car hadn't moved at all, just standing there, not talking, not on their phones, nothing. However, as my sister turned to look at the men, she had claimed to see their eyes being black, dark, and empty. The both of us getting into the car and floored it out of there and didn't stop until we hit the next city. After we had made it to our destination, we had looked just about everywhere on a map but couldn't find that gas station anywhere. We had figured that it was maybe due to the fact that it was just too small to be a location. In the next city over, we had asked around and told some of the locals about the station on the interstate. We even went out of our way to give them the exact location of it, but only got confused looks. Some people say they didn't know about it or simply said that there was no gas station there. Overall, it was a really weird experience and none of us can figure it out till this day. We had been down that interstate since but had never seen that gas station again. The interstate is a very small two-lane road, so if there was something there you would have seen it. A few days into our stay, and we had spoken to a guy who had claimed to be a trucker and had told us similar stories. In the end, we had accepted the fact that there was no rest stop there. I still get chills thinking about it till this day. This didn't happen to me, but rather my mom and dad during their honeymoon. At the time of this story, my mom and dad had lived in Florida, and this was around the summer of 1989. Both my parents resided in Cocoa Beach and were planning on taking a weekend trip down to the Florida Keys. My mom loved the beaches, and my dad loved the weather. As the story goes, they had left on a Thursday afternoon and would be there for the weekend. It was that Thursday evening where they were driving on a deserted road surrounded by forests on both sides. Now there's barely anybody on this road, and that's when my dad slows down when he sees something on the side of the road. About 20 feet away is a large white van with its headlights turned on. He then sees two men jump out of the van and begin to flag down my parents, thinking that they might have needed help. My dad pulls over to the side of the road and gets down from the car with my mom. The two men slowly approached the car wearing what appeared to be black clothing with the word police on the back of their shirts. At first, my parents thought that they could have been highway patrol or something, but they would soon find out that wasn't the case. They go up to my dad and say, "Hi there, we're police officers. It appears you were going above the speed limit. We're going to have to find you for that." They then presented a piece of paper to my parents as, I guess, of some sort of identification. Almost immediately, my dad had caught on to the fact that they were most certainly not police officers. For one, Their van was an unmarked vehicle. They seemed a bit too young, and the uniforms they were wearing didn't really matter. Really resembled that of a police officer. As a matter of fact, it looked more closely related to casual security attire. My dad confronted them about this, to which they had claimed that they were under-equipped. However, my dad wasn't buying it and went back to his car. No matter how hard they tried to claim that my parents were being arrested, they weren't buying it. At this point, the two men began knocking on the car windows, now demanding for my mom and dad to step out of the vehicle. One of them takes out a window breaker and proceeds to smash the window on my mom's side of the car. My dad thankfully floors it down the road, but not before flipping them off. He ended up driving a little faster, fearing that they would somehow catch up to them, but they thankfully never did. Well, nobody got hurt. It was one of the scariest and weirdest encounters my parents had ever come across. This happened to my family and I on a road trip in 2013 while on our way to visit our extended family in Albuquerque, New Mexico. It is a very long and boring trip there as we always came straight from San Diego. Albuquerque is a very small city in the south that looks like a ghost town. It's basically a city that was built in the middle of a desert with nothing but Rocky Mountains in the distance. Those who have been to Albuquerque could probably relate to what I'm saying. In fact, if you go far enough, there's even a few buildings and residential areas that look as though if it were built from adobe mud. While it's not the best vacation spot, it's relatively quiet there for the most part, but that's beside the point. Our cousins had invited us to their ranch for the 4th of July, seeing as our uncle was in town. It was me, my mom, and my dad in the car getting ready to do the nearly 12-hour drive to Albuquerque. On the 3-4 hour mark of the trip, I decided that I'd take a short power nap to pass time. Looking back, I'd say I slept for about a good 4 hours or so when I for some reason wake up. I took a look at the time on my iPad I had brought with me, which showed it was 11:34 p.m. It was at that point when I felt our car begin slowing down, which I assumed was because we had ran out of gas or something. The car comes to a complete stop and I look outside the windows and we're on this deserted road surrounded by desert in all directions. My guess was that we had to be somewhere in Arizona by now, and that's when I hear my mom say, "What the hell is that?" I sit up from my seat, and that's when I noticed something laying in the road about 15 feet away from the car. Keep in mind it was the dead of night, but I was able to see it from the headlights of our car and see two people laying face down on the road. One that appeared to be a male and the other a female. Parked on the side of the road beside them was a small 1992 Toyota Camry. There were also clothes and what looked like other personal belongings scattered all along the pavement. However, the thing that seemed off about them was how they were laying down so parallel and close to each other as if it had been staged. I'm not sure what it was, but something about it just felt wrong. An ambush, I thought. I explained this to my dad and he seemed to catch on to my suspicions as well. My dad takes out his Glock he keeps in the glove compartment and tells us to stay put while getting out of the car. He shines his phone flashlight at the two bodies still laying on the road and makes his way over to the other car. He shines his light inside but doesn't appear to see anything. I then see him look under the car, and that's when he let out a blood-curdling scream I had never heard him do. He starts running to our car, and that was when the two people on the road begin to get up on both legs and proceed to run towards us. Thankfully, my dad had managed to go around them with his foot practically glued to the gas. All the while my dad is cussing to himself as if he had seen God knows what. My dad was a pretty tough guy and even served in the armed forces, so seeing him like that was enough to freak anyone out. My mom is also freaking out, demanding answers from him, but he just stayed silent for most of the car ride. We get to my cousin's ranch, and as we pull in, my dad finally explains what he saw. What he said chilled me to the bone. As he was approaching the car on the side of the road, he had bent down to look under the car when he saw eyes. It was only until he shined his flashlight where he saw a dead woman facing him. He described her mouth being hung open and her eyes filled with terror. By the looks of it, he claimed that she had been dead for at most a day or two. My mom and I were both shocked as to what he said and called the police and gave them the location. However, the police report turned up nothing, as there was nothing found on that road. The rest of our stay went fine, but we make sure to take another way home.